All right, well, I say let's get going. My name is Melissa Garland. Hello to everyone who's joined our webinar today. Welcome to what we're calling From Crisis to Opportunity, Technology's Turning Point in Higher Ed Student Communications. Again, I'm Melissa Garland. I'm the VP of Client Development for Atlas RTX. We create and manage AI-powered chatbots that drive marketing, sales, and service. And one of the verticals that we focus on is higher education. And I am really excited today to be hosting our first higher ed focused webinar with two of our very own clients. I'm going to introduce them here as we get going. So first of all, we have Dr. Linda Fleming, who is the Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs at Northern Pennsylvania Regional College. Hi, Linda. Hello. And we have Dan Gaines, who is, now Dan, I've just lost it. Here we go, the Associate Director of Marketing at Purdue University's Krannert School of Management. Welcome, Dan.
Hi.
So what we're going to talk about today, which is very exciting, is that we're structured today around the key changes that higher education is having to address as a result of the fairly dramatic shifts that the coronavirus has imposed. Across industries, many people are moving to technological solutions that used to be like, someday we'll invest in that. But with this change, you have to do it now. We were just discussing this before we got on our webinar today. There are industries that we've seen even outside of our own where we're having to shift into technology that we never used to use. So we want to touch on how things like recruitment, admissions, instruction, those are shifting, but we're going to really focus heavily on student communications and how that's changed and ways that you at Purdue and you at NPRC are addressing them. So I'd like to ask each of you to just do a quick introduction of yourself and a little bit about your school. Linda, would you like to start?
Sure. So currently I'm Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs at the Northern Pennsylvania Regional College. We are a community college that serves 9 counties in northwestern Pennsylvania, which is a geographical size of about the state of Connecticut, the state of Rhode Island, and half of Maryland all put together, with about 1/10 of the population.
Wow.
So we are a community college. We offer 2-year degrees in workforce development. I've been in higher education about 21 years at this point. In my current role as vice president for about the last 6 months. Prior to that, I was 20 years at a private nonprofit institution where I taught anywhere from undergraduate to doctoral programs and ended up as an academic dean.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Dan, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I work in marketing for the Krannert School of Management at Purdue University. I work specifically in the graduate programs. So we have 3 MBAs, 8 specialized masters that I directly manage the marketing for and communications. That's student population, graduate students of over 500. Working day to day, everything from external marketing communications to internal communications for all those. Also we're starting to centralize a lot of our communications within Krannert, so getting more involved with that, and especially with everything going on with that's kind of been sped up significantly with everything going on with the global pandemic. So Purdue is located in Indiana, West Lafayette, Indiana. And it has about a student population of about 50,000 students.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. You're both highlighting exactly what we thought would be fun, would be having these 2 very different perspectives, community college perspective in a more rural community and a very large school MBA perspective. So I'm looking forward to getting into some of these questions with you. And as we go through, as our host Chris here has noted in the chat, if any of you should have questions, feel free to drop them in the question and answer center and we will address them if we can as we go. But let's jump right into the premise of our webinar. do each of you tend to think of your audience as digital natives, right? This is how we think about the younger generation now. And with that understanding of them, even before this crisis hit, how did that affect your thoughts on communication and use of technology as you communicated with prospective students and current students? Linda, would you like to start?
Sure. So as a community college, we serve traditional and non-traditional students. So some of our students are digital natives and some of them are not, very much like our faculty. We have some people that are very comfortable and others that are not. So we've had to look at how we are providing services to students, to recognizing that some are digital natives, some are not. So we are using a variety of tools, whether it is through technology, through texting, video conference, email. We're always in touch with our students, but some of them we're using, slightly different methods to get in touch with them. We're finding that some students they very easily translate to being able to communicate digitally, and others do not. So we've really had to make that a very individualized choice. And this shift has required us to make a huge leap in some of our technological skills to bring some of the folks that were lagging behind up to speed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I'd like to get into that too. Dan, how were you already thinking about your audience even prior to the crisis and how you would communicate with them?
Yeah, so I would consider vast majority of our students, prospective students, as digital natives. It's just becoming a growing, that segment has become, just growing every year. And so we've already been thinking about like how we communicate, everything that we communicate in a paper form, in a hard copy form. We're also pushing online, pushing digital documents, things like that, but also just mixing media, quite a bit. So infusing more and more video, making more and more investments in there, and just communicating, having channels that are more, engagement channels where we're engaging one-on-one with people as
Right.
well.
That's interesting. So so how has that been exacerbated, Dan, then by what's happened with the coronavirus?
Well, we've been getting a lot of questions, so we've had to really think about how we're responding, be proactive, and how we're sending outbound communications, but then also we're seeing more and more engagement and questions about how we're responding to the coronavirus, and so we've been pretty agile in that, but then being able to answer those one-on-one questions, because everybody has their own concerns. We also work with a global audience, our prospective students are from around the world, and so there's certain things that are happening, started happening early on in India and China that were affecting students that were that were thinking about coming here, and so we had to be way ahead on some of those conversations and really have responses in place. And so we've been, I feel like we've been pretty well positioned to do that and receive some of those questions, but it's changing constantly as well. So we have to respond very quickly.
Are there investments or technological tools that you find you're now using substantially more than you would have prior in your marketing efforts?
So from the one-on-one, the chatbot has been a significant, help for us, because there's people that are, especially since we're working remotely, we can easily engage with students through that chatbot. They're getting real-time responses, but if we're not able to, if the bot's not able to answer, we can jump in right away and engage with them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's alleviating a lot of concerns. You don't want to wait on somebody to receive an email necessarily in those situations. You want to be able to respond directly to their concerns. So that's been a huge benefit for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like we also have outbound communications that we're responding as soon as things like testing centers closing. How is that impacting applications? Well, being on the forefront of that and not leaving questions in students' minds, but communicating to them, things like that.
So Linda, how has your approach at NPRC shifted as the coronavirus hit, and what kind of communications and or technologies were you starting to use?
Well, we've always been more of a remote delivery provider anyhow, geographic area. One of the things that I'm seeing as a supervisor is that I'm having to become a virtual supervisor, and that's not something I've ever done before. And so I'm always asking people what they need, and made the mistake of canceling a meeting and then hearing later that people were really upset that they felt like they wanted to do that. So we are shifting the way that we're doing things, but in some ways trying to keep what we were doing that was working well. So for example, within the organization, we used to have a lot of hallway conversations, and a lot of work would get done that way. And we were just talking in a meeting today, that rather than having every meeting with an agenda, that we probably needed to have some hallway conversation meetings where it was just like an open conversation, probably with a facilitator who could keep the conversation on track and, try to make it productive and not just like a circular, rant, but trying to create that kind of experience online that would replicate to some degree what happens in the office.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. And your school, NPRC, is both, it's kind of a hybrid, right, of online, offline, which is a unique structure already. Now you're saying, are you able to keep some of that offline right now, or is it all purely online?
So we've always used video conferencing to deliver our courses. Our instructors, because we cover such a large geographic area, our instructors are in one location, and they'll be in a classroom with however many students are at that location, but then they could be video conferencing with students from 5 or 6 or 7 other locations. And that way we're able to have enough students across the region to create a course. So what's happened is, when we've had instructional sites, there's a fewer number of technological pieces that we have to coordinate. Now that everybody's remote and working at home, we're working with everybody's, private computer set up and everybody's personal laptop, and you don't have proctors anymore. We used to have proctors at every location, troubleshoot a lot. We're finding that the demand on our IT and instructional support people has just like tripled.
Right.
Yeah. So that's been a huge change.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that shift here in a little bit. That's such an important thing people wouldn't have even considered would be an issue, I think. And Dan, your focus is on marketing, so maybe you have less insight into how class delivery is happening there at Purdue, but maybe even in the marketing side and or on education side, has there been you're seeing that same, like you've had to go everything technological, you need your IT people up and ready to go? Is that going to put a bigger strain on on that side of the house at the school?
Yeah, for sure. The IT has been exceptionally important for getting us all set up on remote working, but then moving our entire student population, both residential and online. They've already been there, working in the online space, but setting up all the necessary systems and training for students that they weren't prepared to do an online class. That's
Right.
that's not what they were expecting. And then helping all the faculty get them prepared for online delivery, because having a certain level of expectation for what we're delivering, the product we're delivering to students.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
what would you say has been the most significant communications shift, right? So what are the big message shifts that you've had to make? And what are you like? Someone making choices. Do you address the, how do you ensure that students stay calm, that they are, able to stay engaged without, and at the same time address their concerns? So I guess, Linda, let me take that to you and tell me how you are trying to walk that line.
Sure. I don't know that we can keep students calm. I think it's been a huge shift for them, and we're finding that many of them are really struggling with trying to learn at home, probably for many of the same reasons that those of us who are now working at home are finding it challenging to work at home. Many of our students have children, they have families that they're responsible for. In our region of the country, and the population that we serve is very rural, so we have areas in our region where the internet is very poor. Some people are still pretty much on a dial-up system,
Mhm.
and some people have no access even to self-service. So some people really have no digital access. So that's been a huge challenge to try to accommodate. Um, but in terms of like how we communicate to them, what I'm finding is that you have to be as transparent as possible. Tell people what you know, tell people what you don't know, um, and communicate frequently. I'm trying to send out communications probably twice a week, not just to students, but to staff, to the board of trustees. Trying to make messages that get sent out fairly short, have a single topic so that there's not too much at any one time, but at the same time always acknowledging the crisis, the distress people feel, and then putting in a good dose of hope in there as well. I think people need to feel comfortable that those of us who are responsible for institutions can figure this out, and we can find our way through it, and it's going to be a challenge, and we need to acknowledge that, but they need to understand that we can get there.
Yeah.
That piece is important. And then making sure that each of those messages gets tweaked to address a particular constituent group.
Yeah. Dan, what's your take on that? I mean, as marketing team, messaging is everything. So what's
Yeah.
been your shift there?
Linda, totally agree with a lot of things that Linda said as far as transparency, being out front on communications, not leaving questions in the minds of prospective students, being very proactive in communicating with them. And just kind of, giving insights on how we're going to address this and building that confidence. But at the same time, we want to address questions. We want to inform people. And, we're trying to do everything there, but we don't want the pandemic to control the narrative of what we're trying to communicate to students. So we're doing a lot of things to reposition the situation. Help people see business school in a different light. So, for example, we're using it as a case study for current students and confirmed students. So we have alumni and faculty that we have in fact, right now while we're recording this, they're doing a session where they're talking with HR alumni from the Krannert School that are in leadership positions in HR in different companies and different verticals. So using that to educate our students on how do you handle a crisis. We also have a student or a recent alumnus that's working on a project to mass produce low-cost ventilators specifically for coronavirus patients. And so we just ran a story about that yesterday. So trying to push, help people to see business school in a different light, and to highlight, ways that we can make an impact. The business school has an impact, and then them as when they become a student here, that they can also get the tools that they need to make similar kinds of impact in their world. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
what about the tools for communication in this market? So obviously email is like the best one that we all still are using, but are you shifting at all the tools that you use? Are you going more to text? Are you going more to ensuring that you're, I don't know, more frequent updating of your website? Like are there been changes in the technology you use to communicate for either one of you? Feel free to jump in.
I would say that we're probably using texting somewhat more. Right now, we're a pretty small institution, so we can do that in an individual way, but I know that there's some great texting programs out there where you can mass text people, and that's very effective for a younger generation. They respond much better to text than they do email. So sometimes we email and it's like sending it out into the black hole. So we're using video conferencing a lot more as a way of connecting, not just with ourselves internally in the office and in amongst the employees, but again, working with the students and encouraging them to video conference with one another.
Yeah, yeah. Is that true at your end as well, Dan?
Yeah, I think, for those that we have we've already had them really engage with us. So prospective, applicants, admitted students, we're emailing them updates regularly. We want to, keep them, as soon as we know information, we want to share that with them. But, as far as like one-on-one question answers, leveraging texting a lot more. And again, some of that's through the chat bot. We're engaging with texting just to make sure that prospective students are clear on changes that are going on, things like that.
Right.
So I'd say, and we're also leveraging video a lot more. So we're trying to push a lot more through social and video to, again, continue to reframe the narrative a bit. So yeah, I think we're using, it just depends on where the engagement level is with the prospective student.
Yeah, does that make it challenging? Some want to engage this way, some want to engage that way. Is that a challenge to manage?
We've got a pretty good sense for, which populations we need to engage in, are more likely. It is a challenge, reproducing in several different channels, but I think that we have a pretty good sense for who do we need to engage with what channel. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we're coming up on the end of the school year, hard to believe, which for many of us now means a complete half of the year that was indoors under mom's tutelage. Some not great, by the way. That's just a self-confession there. But end of the school year, end of the budget year, right? And I'm curious to know how you're thinking about adjustments that you might be making to spend with regard to either marketing or broader as you head into your next fiscal year. Linda, would you like to take that?
Sure. So I'm going to take a broader perspective and as a public institution, and I think all the private institutions, I think we can assume that our budgets are going to be reduced either from state funding, from tuition revenues, from endowment funds that have, lost their value. So I think we're pretty much convinced that there's going to be a reduction in budgets. So I think thinking about that, we have to think about budget cuts much more strategically. A lot of places will just do kind of across the board cuts, like everybody gets the 10%, 20%, whatever cut, and then they all have to accommodate that. And I'm not sure that that's a good way to do it because there are areas where we need to invest money to cope with the crisis or invest for the future. And we don't want to be cutting areas that are really our future growth areas or the areas that are going to get us through this current time. So right now, as I'm looking at budgets and where we might be able to prune back a little bit, I would never prune back right now my IT or instructional design staff because we're going to be online. We're going to be probably there for a while. And if we go back to face-to-face, we may come back. to having to move online depending on what happens with the virus. So those groups are essential for online delivery, and we may actually need to reallocate resources to boost those, to be able to accommodate. The other place, as I was thinking about this, is the counseling centers. Students are distressed, and reducing your counseling center support is not a good idea to do right now. So that's another area to at least keep as it is, or potentially boost that.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. Dan, what about on the marketing front?
So I think there's some of our cuts are going to be kind of organic. So there are certain things that we had planned on doing, particularly with international marketing, things like that, that we are scaling back on until we see how everything unfolds in the global market, and how just how things change after the pandemic. So, and then, there's also some things we had relate with that involve travel and things like that. So some of that is organically we're not going to be doing, or we're cutting back on. So, I think there will be cuts, but I don't think that, we're going to come out with, we're going to come out with everything to keep us, going from a marketing standpoint. And the other thing with business school is, we're approaching a recession, or we're in the middle of a recession. And that's when a lot of students go back to school, particularly MBA, to get their MBA or a business specialized master's. So it's critical for us to maintain relevance, be in the market. So I don't anticipate huge cuts in kind of the necessary things that we're doing to market programs.
Okay.
Just from a business standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. And what you've just said there actually touches on a question that's come through in our chat, which was a question about whether you're seeing changes in the nature of your enrollments for the fall. This may be more applicable to you, Dan. I don't know, Linda, you can speak to it too, but is it fewer international students, fewer in-state, out-of-state? Have you seen any shifts in that yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think the international, that is really hinging on visas right now. So I think, a lot of that's been closed off. So we're kind of in a holding pattern on that. We're still communicating with those international students, particularly those that are confirmed that do want to come here. So we're kind of waiting to see how that plays out. There's some also with testing, the necessary testing to complete their application. So we're kind of working through those kinds of situations. And again, keeping people, prospective students apprised of developments, and educating them. And then, so we've seen some of that, but we don't know the eventual fallout from that. We still don't know that for a little bit, but we've moved back deadlines. We've seen that domestic students the interest is starting to increase. We've also seen online programs, some interest start to increase there. And I think that's in response to the approaching recession, like I spoke about. Students thinking, okay, well, I might be out of a job. What can I do to not just stand still? How can I, enhance my career?
Right, for sure. So is that an impact shift for you at all, Linda, in terms of enrollment?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think what we are probably going to see is we have a workforce development arm in our area. And I think with a number of people who have already lost their jobs and companies that may not be able to return, they're going to be looking at getting different skills. So similar to what Dan was saying, we're looking at that, but at the before your bachelor's degree. So people with a high school diploma who are looking to, start an associate's degree, or people who are looking for a workforce development kind of training, that's the area that I see as a big increase potential.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, great. Okay. So has the shift to digital impacted your own staff, so your own needs from skill sets within your teams? And are you, either administrative or instructive? And what is something that that you think that your respective schools or other schools who are people who are listening to this call, what could they be doing to help ensure that your team in-house is able to address what students need now? Feel free to, whoever would like to go first.
Sure, I'll go first. So I would say just stay in touch. Be in touch with how everybody's doing, asking them specifically how they're doing, and doing things like I think I mentioned that we're going to do, like hallway meetings, just informal conversations, trying to keep as much semblance of normalcy. So acknowledging major life events. You know, we've had people get married, we're having an impending birth, so we've had people die during this past month, and so acknowledging those as they happen. And then we've got some teams that are being really playful. There's a group that do themed meetings, and they've had Pirate Day and they all dress up and then they get a lot of work done. I've attended a couple of those. We've had some pretty atrocious renditions of Happy Birthday to celebrate. And then we've also tried to do some like virtual happy hours for very casual, fun kinds of conversations, and that helps people stay connected in a way that when at a meeting and just getting through the agenda, you know, being able to just talk casually.
You had mentioned that some of your team may not be as adept at some of this technology. How are you helping them get up to speed?
They're getting a lot of IT support.
Yeah.
And so my IT people have been waving their white flag and saying, hey, we need some help here because we're drowning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a huge increase in their workload.
Yeah. Okay. So Dan, what happens in the marketing side in terms of not only your team and colleagues and going online?
So I think collaboration is more essential than ever right now. So there are, one of the, you asked about budget. Well, the one area that I think that will be impacted most is hiring. So we're asked to do more with the same resources from a personnel standpoint. There's also at the same time personnel that were very heavy face-to-face interaction roles that all of a sudden they don't have that now, and so they're going to be some of the roles going to need to change in this online environment. And so I think we're going to be, in fact, I know we're going to be asked to collaborate a bit more with those folks, bring them in, and maybe train them on skills that they are not used to doing in the online space, to kind of make up for the fact that we can't hire people right away to do some of these the planned hirings that we did have. So
right.
And I think that one thing that we've done at the school, our dean is part of the university's task force, one of the leaders in response to the COVID-19. And he's done a great job of, like, we just had we have regular town hall meetings. And we just had one like on Friday where he's addressing us as a group, keeping us as staff informed, faculty, staff, whatever, so that, because there's a lot of questions even for us, like what the future is. So if we're well informed, if we're calm and we're at ease, that we convey that to prospective students as well.
Yeah. And again, someone is asking about how you help students who thrive better in a face-to-face environment, who themselves may struggle with going online. And Linda, you've hinted at this a bit. Are you doing things to help teach those students? Do you giving them IT support as well directly to teach them how to do what they need to do, or what kinds of things are you gearing up to help those students?
Yeah, so we've had to provide a lot of IT support to students and faculty, staff.
Yeah.
So it's been, everybody needs it. And I know from our perspective, one of the first things we had to think about was, as people went remote, who had access to adequate technology? And so we had to make sure that people had cell phones or hotspots or adequate broadband to be able to function as they went home. And that wasn't just students, but that was faculty and staff as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dan, as a former MBA student myself, at one point, I never did a single class online. I never, and had many opportunities to knock on doors and talk to my professors. So that's would be gone now, for at least in the immediate scenario. So how are you helping students with that kind of a shift?
So yeah, I think our IT department has been really helpful in also, we're leveraging tools like Microsoft Teams, making that available to students, so that because a lot of our curriculum is team-based, so not wanting to lose that element, and so we've fortunate to be able to provide that to students so that they can continue that collaboration outside of the classroom instruction that they're receiving. So, again, the IT department's been critical right now. So yeah, hats off to all the IT pros
right.
out there working with schools.
They're like, we knew we'd get our day in.
I would add to that, though. I think it's more than just technology support that students need. They need that technological support, but we're having faculty are doing virtual office hours. So rather than students actually walking into a faculty, they meet with them virtually, whether it's during a virtual office hour or a scheduled meeting to accommodate everybody's schedules. The other thing that we do to support them is we have our student support specialists, and those are people that work with our students from recruitment all the way through graduation, and they provide services and often help students directly with problems, or at least know where to refer them if they need it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. So are there any other key technological shifts? So of course, now trying to stay on the technology side of this discussion, and yes, it's getting a little bit more toward the self-interest part of the chatbot conversation, but and of course we're talking to you because you're both clients of ours. Let's start actually with this question. What was your incentive for considering chatbot technology as part of your tech stack? What made you even think about that? Dan, you want to start?
Yeah, so we had four major incentives. The first was we recognize the emerging generations of our students, our customers as student. We're coming from Gen Z and millennial groups. So those are digital natives as we round back to where we started the conversation. So they have expectations for on-demand interaction. So we needed to have something that would deliver that. We also have a very small staff. So we needed to add to our staff without really adding to our staff, and so there's some sort of form of automation that needed to occur. And so that's where the chatbot has come into play. As I mentioned before, we reach a global audience. And so they engage with us all hours of the day, on weekends. So we needed to have something that could respond to them at any time. And then we also wanted to just draw in more visitors, engage visitors on our website. So they're there longer. If they're there longer, they get the information that they need, they're more likely to take the next step. So we saw it as it's everywhere from generating inquiries about our programs, but also throughout the whole application process, a tool that could handle all of that. And that's been the chatbot for us.
Yeah, and thus far, I think you've seen some pretty good results. Would you speak to us? How do you think it's helped?
Oh yeah, it's helped significantly. I mean, we have quite a few confirmed. It'd be interesting to see the conclusion of this upcoming cycle. But we've seen just large numbers of confirmed students that have come in some form in their path, have come through the chatbot. They've engaged with it in some form or fashion. So, the chatbot is answering about 60% of student questions the visit. So it's been, and we could probably make it even more, refine it even further, but we actually want that human engagement, which is the other aspect of the chatbot we really like, is one of our staff can jump in at any point to continue the conversation. So it's been extremely valuable tool for us.
That's really interesting. And Linda, we're just getting started with work with you folks, but what was your motivation for considering this technology?
Like Dan said, we have a very limited staff as well. We have a very small staff for the whole college, actually. But the idea of the chatbot for us was a way of expanding our human capital without making more human capital. So we've also seen a lot of pressure being placed on our student support specialists, who are our recruitment folks. And the numbers of questions and places that they get pulled has been significant. And so by adding the chatbot in, we were hoping to alleviate some of that congestion there and we had a live chat, which, sometimes you got an answer immediately and sometimes it was the next day or, an hour or two later. So we were looking for something that was more responsive.
Yeah. And so are there other technological shifts that you are looking at seriously or enhancing as a function of where we are these days? More video, maybe more teams, more, is it really where that's headed in terms of you for an investment? Linda?
I would say definitely. I'm already hearing conversation on some of the higher ed channels about people are already starting to think about whether or not they should have classes live again in the fall, or if they should keep their students remote. So I think we're looking at a prolonged period of time when we are going to have remote students. It is going to change things a lot. We were talking about admissions earlier, and I didn't say, but I'll say now that we're hearing from students that because they are concerned about going away to college and then getting quarantined there, that they're thinking more of staying more locally. So I think it's going to be a huge shift in higher education in general, especially for institutions like the one I was previously at, which was a very strong residential, and it had a huge residential focus with a huge student support and student affairs end of the house. That's going to take a huge shift when we're moving everything remote, and for an extended period. I think we're going to see a huge change in higher education.
Are there any
going to look like?
Yeah, right. Are there any specific technologies that you found like this works really well for us that you'd recommend that your colleagues look into?
Yeah, well, I think
brand names, but just the types of things that you're doing.
Right. I would say, video conferencing, finding something that's very reliable and secure. That's important. It's not a good thing. I've heard about it anecdotally that some classes have been Zoom bombed, which is, not helpful for learning.
Right.
And so just making sure that your technology is secure. I think it's making it very difficult for institutions to have everybody remote because of our ability to keep the technology integrity of our institutions. I know at my previous institution, we were very careful about who got on the network and who was,
right.
And now everybody's remote. So I think all of that's going to change.
Yeah, that's got to be true. Yeah. So, and Dan, are there shifts in your technological focus or more emphasis?
Yeah, I think from tool standpoint, Microsoft Teams has been really good for us. I've used Slack, being in marketing. That's a common channel that's used, but I think Microsoft Teams has been great as far as getting everybody on board quickly. It's very intuitive, easy to use. So we also use Airtable for a lot of our project management. There's other tools like Asana and things like that. So that's and there's some even built within Microsoft Teams and some of the apps that they have. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some utility to that as well. But I think one of the things as far as engaging further is, and this was always the plan with regards to the chatbot, was to add a function of schedule, creating a calendar app where
Mm-hmm.
students can, if someone wants to set up an appointment, they have access to a recruiter or admissions person's calendar where they can have a direct conversation. So that
Mm-hmm.
was always our plan, but now that's kind of moved fast forward, and that's the next thing that we want to add to that experience to further enrich not just the chat bot. That's where I feel like we're going to see most use out of it, but
Yeah.
just our other communications as well, where they can set up these, now that everybody's moving to all these virtual meetings. We want to be able to make that very accessible for prospective students.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Someone is actually asking too, and it feels like it's a technology question, is have you considered, and Dan, you may not know this, but how at Purdue, but how you will eventually address online testing and proctoring of tests?
I'm working on the marketing side. I don't feel like I can answer
Yeah.
that question directly. I know that these are things that others, colleagues of mine, are working on.
Yeah.
It creates unique challenges for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Lynn, are you looking at that?
Yeah, we have invested in Honor Lock.
Okay.
That is a program that you can set up to work with your with your existing technology. When students go on to take an exam, it essentially locks down everything. It locks down their phone, their ability to access the internet, so that you can.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
I need that for my kids.
Yeah. It's like big parental controls.
Wow. Interesting. And so it enables you to sort of assure yourself that they are doing their own work.
They have to have an identification, whether it's a passport or a driver's license or something, to access it. And then it shuts down everything so that they are not able to access digital material.
That's interesting.
An exam. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Okay. And are you thinking now about the reopening of your physical locations? Is that something you're beginning to plan for? And Dan, immediate future is graduation. How do we think about creating some sense of normalcy around some of these events? So, Dan, would you like to start? How are you? I know it's not your primary area, but what's happening at Purdue there to think about going through difficult things and maybe reopening?
Yeah, so I'd say I can maybe address the commencement aspect, because I do know that there's some things at Purdue going on I'm not directly involved with, but there are folks at Purdue working on a virtual commencement. And one of our campuses, our online campus, has pioneered this to a degree. So they're kind of building off of that experience. And but yeah, offering a virtual opportunity, but then also thinking about caring for the current student, and providing a future date where we would have an in-person commencement as well, for those that want to come back to campus. So yeah, I'm not, I'll let Linda speak maybe to the other question about moving back to business.
You're not
on
worried
campus.
about opening
I'm
up
not there yet. I'm not in those discussions.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting issue, right? Like, are we even ready to think about it? I don't know. Linda, what are you thinking?
Well, for us, in Pennsylvania, our governor has closed all of the public schools, all of the colleges from in-person classes, at least through the end of the semester. So we're definitely going to be remote, definitely through the beginning of the summer session. We're not quite sure about the third summer session or not. And then the fall, it's really a good question. I mean, in some ways, I think the next month or so will tell us a little bit about the direction the virus is taking. And then we can start to plan for it. So in fact, when I was talking to my team this morning, I said, hey, we've got to start thinking about what are we going to do? Does it make sense for us to reopen in the fall, knowing that we might need to go back to remote? and go through that transition again mid-semester, or would we be better off just going with remote for the whole semester so that we don't have to make that transition midstream? So that's a conversation that we're going to be having over the next month or two.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a not a small impact on everyone's lives, and certainly in the nature of education, it's really dramatic. Is there, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, is there anything that in your respective areas that you think, oh, this is something that's really useful to know, or that you would love to convey to others that are in this field, that they around the area of technology or managing this crisis, that would be a takeaway that you'd like to offer to the audience here? Linda, would you like to start?
Well, I'm a psychologist by training, so that's where my thinking tends to go, and so I'm thinking this is a very hard time for everybody. It's not just students, it's staff, it's faculty, it's the executives. Everybody's under tremendous pressure to try to figure out how to cope and adapt. And the leaders of our institutions having to come up with solutions in such a confusing environment that seems to be changing pretty much daily. That's a huge stress on everybody. So my recommendation is, my staff were saying, we originally thought, oh, we'll be working from home. It'll be calmer. It'll be a little quieter. And what we're finding is actually the opposite has happened. It's more confusing. And not just because of family disruption, but the increase in work that we're experiencing at the college. So I guess from my psychologist hat, I would say take time for yourself, do some self-care, take a walk, do some yoga if that's your thing, but do whatever you need to do to help yourself think clearly, because right now what we really need is clear thinking.
Yeah, that's great. Dan, what are you have thoughts you have for MBA marketers?
Yeah, so I think that I've been through a couple of past business crisis kind of scenarios, and I think that they're great opportunities to learn and to try new things. And I feel like if you haven't made changes, you need to lean into change rather than fight against it. And if you don't make changes, then you're missing this tremendous opportunity. And I think collaboration is also a key. Higher education is very notorious for working in silos, and but agendas kind of go away when there's a crisis. Everybody kind of is focused on the same goal, and so it creates a unique opportunity to work across across disciplines, things like that, professions, to see how can you help me in this regard, or help me with messaging and narrative, and in saying, how can I help you achieve your objectives? So I think there's, people are more receptive to working together just to achieve a common goal, which is keeping this thing on track in the midst of everything. So
yeah, that's really tremendous. There's so many lessons to be learned. Certainly, we're all finding that at this time you need to be quick, you need to be ready to move. And it's just been such an education for me today to hear from both of you. I really appreciate your time sharing with us your experience, and we look forward to bringing some deeper discussions in this area to our listeners in the coming weeks. So thank you, Linda, Dr. Linda Fleming from Northern Pennsylvania Regional College, and Dan Gaines from University of Purdue University, Krannert School of Management. Thank you both so much for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.